Let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining. If you don't mind, turn off your cell phones so we can go through this uninterrupted. And I think we're already on it. Yeah, I think we're already good. We're already good to go. So again, thank you for coming. This is the third of 4 public information sessions that we're holding, one in each of the 4 towns. Yes.
Just, you guys are talking the projection of bit, maybe separate.
I'll slide down. So one in each of the 4 towns. Orland and Surrey have already done theirs, and Penobscot's is going to be Monday. Thank you. So let's move to the next slide. Now, first, I want to start by acknowledging some of the folks who've been helpful to us. In terms of, as you may know, we're already incurring some costs, and so each of the towns has been soliciting. Some towns have put up some of their own money. Blue Hill committed some of the select board committed some funds to it, but we've also been soliciting donations. We had one generous donor provide a $500 donation to support the effort, and I think soon to come, we'll get the Toddy Pond Association has also been soliciting funds and has on our behalf, and will divide the funds that we'll divide the funds they've received to date by amongst the various towns in a proportion that we've all agreed on. I also especially want to thank Nina Milken, who's here tonight somewhere. Where is she? There she is. And Steve Bishop, who are regional legislators, who have been doing a lot of work on our behalf, both to enact legislation that we will need. We'll describe that in more detail, specific to our situation, and then some other legislative improvements to improve the way dam abandonment process works going forward. And some other things that I think I'll touch on. There's a slide to touch on it later. In addition to that, they've been helpful in terms of being our feet on the ground in Augusta vis-a-vis the DEP in particular, and the other agencies that may eventually become involved. Because right now, this is a Department of Environmental Protection process, and so we're trying to make sure that they stay engaged and are at least kind of, I won't say looking out for our interests, but at least cognizant of our interest and supportive as much as they can be. The lake associations, both Alamoosic Lake Association and for us Toddy Pond, has been super helpful in terms of doing a bunch of things, getting these slides together, doing the analysis of what would the shoreline look like if the pond levels were dropped. So they've done a huge amount of work on our behalf, as well as the Maine monitors run a bunch of articles on the subject of dams and dam abandonment, which I think has been helpful to educating people. Kevin Turcotte, who I don't know, but he actually did the GIS charts to show what the shoreline would look like if the water levels declined. Charles Block is putting together a business survey. It's out there to figure out how would local businesses, not just in the 4 towns, be impacted if the dams were the impounded waters were released. And then lastly, Mark Whiting from the Hancock County Soil and Water Conservation District is here. He was actually quite helpful to us in terms of organizing these meetings, because Gina Bouchon from from Orland applied for a grant a year ago. I think a portion of those proceeds has been kind of redirected to support this public outreach effort and make sure that we can hold meetings like this. And as you'll hear momentarily, hire a moderator to help run the meeting, especially the Q&A. So why are we here? It's mostly because there's a lot of concern about what would happen if the impounded waters were released. There, Toddy Pond, which again I'm going to focus mostly on Toddy Pond, but also in the same abandonment process, Bucksport Mill has requested permission to abandon Alamoosic Lake and Silver Lake. Silver Lake, we're not spending a lot of time, focusing on because it's entirely in Bucksport. It's their it's their water source, it's their fire source. It has revenues associated because it is a water source. So they're in kind of a different situation. Alamoosic Lake and Toddy Pond are both primarily recreational and residential lakes without being a public water source. And so they're quite similar. Alamoosic Lake is entirely within Orland. So while the issues are very similar and we're all 4 towns, in fact, 5 towns, including Bucksport, are working together, from Blue Hill's perspective, the one that we're really focused on is Toddy Pond, because that's the one where we have some properties that are above the pond. And beyond the recreational uses, there's obviously concern about environmental concerns. You know, it's become a habitat for a variety of birds. We talk about certainly loons, eagles, fish, other wildlife, and so there's a lot of interest in maintaining the dams. So, and I'll come back to that in a second. So why do we care? The economic impact is, for us, is the direct impact. I can think of 2 big ones. One is there's a property tax impact. If the waters were released, the value of those pond front properties in Blue Hill would decline substantially. And that means, you know, when their values go down, they pay less property taxes. That means the rest of us have to pick up the difference. And later on, we can talk about maybe some broad estimates of what that might look like. And then secondly, business disruption. You know, it's not just about the property owners and maybe some of the recreational users, but there are also some local businesses that benefit from either providing services to people who use the ponds, be it a restaurant or Hammond Lumber or, you know, Chris Muse's business renting kayaks, or more generally, the more people, the ponds certainly attract people to the Blue Hill area, as well as the other 3 towns, and losing them would have an impact on it. That's part of what this business survey is about, is to figure out like if the ponds were drained, how bad would it be for your business and what would it look like? So we've been asking businesses about that. This slide, hopefully you can see it. The kind of so it shows what the water surface area would look like if the water level declined by 8 feet, which we think is a reasonable estimate of what would happen if the impounded waters were released, if the dam were opened up to let the waters flow out. And all of the brown areas around there, at least the light gold areas, are what today are covered by are part of Toddy Pond, but would basically be, well, I'm not sure we really know, but I think it's a safe guess it'd be kind of a mud flat, kind of extending out there. And you can see there'd still be some, Toddy Pond would become distinctly at least 3 ponds with maybe a stream or something connecting. So it would look very different. Blue Hill is, as you probably know, is down in the lower right-hand corner, and we'd have a lot of mud flats because our part of Toddy Pond is not very deep. I'm going to go through the history really quickly. Gina has lived through it for probably more than a couple of years. But for our purposes, we are where we are. So I'll move through it relatively quickly. There were, and Gina, if you have any questions, Gina can certainly expand on it. So it became known, I think, well before they filed for Bucksport Mill, the owner filed their petition to abandon it, that they were looking to get out of it, and that the ownership of the dam was kind of up for grabs. And so Gina and the other 4 towns, Orland and the other 4 towns, got together to kind of work together to figure out how to mostly to maintain the dams and to organize to avoid a scenario where the waters are released. Bucksport passed a dam abandonment ordinance itself, a local ordinance, to govern the process by which an owner of a dam can abandon it. And Orland enacted a moratorium to stop it. I think at this point they have sort of held off on pushing to formalize that with their own abandonment ordinance, but it's a possibility that it could come back at some point if they thought it made sense. It's part of the dampening, part of the reason that they're not pursuing it aggressively is that at least one part is Bucksport Mill seems to have made it pretty clear that they don't think that Bucksport's dam ordinance, which is in effect, applies to them, is legal and valid. And so the question is, what's your appetite for litigating that question at some great, meaningful expense? So, so they did eventually. So Bucksport Mill filed a couple of applications. The first one was not considered adequate. So they filed, and I don't think they gave the right public notice before they filed it. So they refiled on October 19th, an application to under the state statute, to abandon the dam. There's a process laid out in the statute that I'll describe in a second as to how that petition moves through through consideration. And step number one is once DEP determines that the petition includes all the information it is supposed to under the statute, they have to either accept it, which they did on November 1st, or reject it by saying you haven't met all the criteria. They accepted on November 1st, which starts a time clock as to how much time for a consultation period defines how long the owner has to consult with potentially interested new owners of the dams. And the statute provides for 180 days period, which the clock started ticking on November 1st. And under the statute for municipalities like our group, there's an option for an additional 180-day extension, which given the pace of things we've requested, and I'm pretty sure we've been granted. So, so one of the other things the towns had to do under the statute was to sort of confirm they were at least potentially interested in taking over the dams. And all 5 towns held special town meetings to ask the question, should we stay in the consultation process or not? And all 5 towns voted yes. So we're in the process. On November 14th, as you may know, if you're interested in the dams, Bucksport Mill, the owner, held a big public meeting in Bucksport at the MMA training facility there. And if you attended, you might have been a little disappointed because they said up front, they're not going to provide any answers. They will take questions and comments and revert later. In fact, they promised, I think, within 2 weeks, they would post some answers on this Bucksport Mill Answers.com website. So people got to make their statements and ask their questions, and virtually no questions were answered other than sort of trivial ones. And as it turns out, if you've gone to bucksportmillanswers.com, I think you'll find that they weren't really, at least I don't consider them really to be many answers. They were mostly responses, which is, we'll answer this later. We'll tell you, we'll tell people who sign an NDA, it's still in process. So there's very, very little information coming back to the public, to the broad public. I mentioned consultation. There are a variety of groups that they're supposed to consult with, including individual, so abutting property owners have to be notified and consulted with. The municipalities involved have to be consulted with. I think the Native American tribes have to be consulted. There's a variety of parties, but the key ones at this point, I think, are the individual consultations. Some people think may have taken place, may have been sort of satisfied, even though I hate to use that word, by that big public meeting. But the principal one that's still continuing is our municipal consultation process. So, as I said before, the towns have all voted to engage in consultation. The 4 towns sent Bucksport, the owner, a list of questions before they filed the petition, basically saying, these are things that we think should be in your petition so we can evaluate whether to take ownership of the dams. It wasn't included in the petition. We were disappointed by that. Then after maybe just before the November 14th meeting, we sent another list of questions, kind of similar list, but I sent it again and no answer. And then we sent one I think just after all 5 towns had voted to participate. Same list, very similar list. And all they've done is said, thanks for your Thanks for your questions. We're considering answers and we'll get back to you. Period. So we're waiting. So what you'll hear tonight in the Q&A portion, we have many of the key questions are still unknown. We're still waiting for Bucksport Mill to answer them, and they've not provided any meaningful information to us that you all don't know. So at the end of the original, under the statute, under the first 180 days, the owner is supposed to report back to DEP and say whether they found a potential owner or not. And as Gina just confirmed, municipalities can extend it for 180 days. We wrote a letter a while ago. Our attorney wrote a letter 2 weeks ago. Thank you. To say basically, just so you know, time's a ticking and we've received no answers. So this 180-day clock is running out. We're going to need an extension at the very least to evaluate whatever information we might get, but also to go through the municipal process, because even if our legislators, kind of deliver the mechanism that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, it's going to be subject to a town vote in all 4 towns. And we need time to educate not just the people who are really focused on the dams, but all of the voters in the town to make sure that we get everybody to sign on to a deal we think is a good one. If we get it, to a deal we think is a good one. So anyway, so we've got this extension to October 2025. And at the end of that process, if no private owner steps up to take ownership of the dams or any of the 3 dams, then under the statute, the process goes back to the state, and 3 agencies take a look at it. They have 60 days, and they do it sequentially. They have 60 days to take a look at the dam costs, the benefits to the broad public, to the environment, et cetera, and make a decision or a recommendation as to whether they are prepared to take ownership of the dams. So IF&W looks first, then DACF, and then lastly, MEMA, the Maine Emergency Management Association looks at it. And if none of those 3 agencies steps up and says, we think the state should own the dam, then under the statute, DEP is required to order release of the waters. So if no private or municipal owner steps up and the 3 agencies aren't interested, the water gets released. So a significant part of the effort is to try to avoid that. Avoid that. So I mentioned some of the things that Nina and Steve are working on. These are some of the other initiatives going on. Nina was a sponsor of this governance bill, change in the consultation requirements, because they're kind of a mess. Now that we look at them, I think everybody's looking at them with some experience, it's a mess. So there's an effort to improve those. And certainly going forward, they are talking about setting up some funds to help provide technical assistance and maybe some money to assisting with assessing dam conditions, and a revolving fund for repairs, so that owners could borrow money to be able to effectuate repairs and then pay it over time. So the next dam can be done. And then some changes to the statutes governing what MEMA can do, to allow them to do more inspections and more technical assistance. Right now, my understanding is they have 1 inspector.
1.5.
1.5 in the state. Yeah, somewhere between 1.5 and almost none. Way too few resources to actually do what they're supposed to be doing across the state. There are a lot of dams in Maine. And so I've talked about the legislation that we know Nina will be helping us with. She's been very supportive. And basically the idea is to create a, you see the word from the beginning here, a quasi-municipal watershed protection district. That would be, so an entity. I think of it very much, in Blue Hill, we actually have a Blue Hill Water District. I see it as being kind of very similar to that, in the sense of a defined entity, not the town, not the select board, but a different entity covering a certain area. In Blue Hill, there's a little portion of Blue Hill, it's the district, governed by a board, which could either be appointed for example, by the select boards of the 4 towns or elected. We've talked about having representation of property owners, waterfront property owners on that board, and they might, better solution for them might be to elect their members. That's kind of a detail, I think. And then the big question, one of the things we're going to do later tonight and hope to get your feedback on is if we're to go that route and have this entity own the dam, and I'm focused on Toddy Pond Dam, how should it be funded? The annual cost of upkeep, monitoring, inspections, and eventually repairs, who should bear those costs? And we've talked about, it could be all the property owners, kind of all on their shoulders. It could be all on the town's shoulders, or it could be shared between the property owners and the towns. And part of the reason, I'd say almost the principal reason for going this kind of legislative route is that it provides this entity with the ability to enforce an assessment on property owners, like property tax, but separate. So it wouldn't be an optional payment from the property owners. It would be something that they, under some formula, would have to contribute. And it could do the same for the towns, to sort of commit the towns to pay their share. So which is something that can't be done on a sustainable basis through an informal agreement. There's some pond associations that own some other dams in Maine. Every year they're looking for donations, and it's not really clear. Well, it's kind of clear, but it's not really clear what happens if they don't get enough donations to cover the cost of the dams. So they're kind of biting their nails every year to see if they can keep going. And some of the other ones that are funded by towns are also biting their nails every year because every year the town's commitment to the dams is subject to a town vote. And the question is, well, what happens if one of the towns votes no on their share? So we have to have a mechanism. We'd like to have a mechanism that's kind of robust enough to sustain those kind of outcomes. Whatever we do, and this entity would own, operate, maintain the dams. That really be the purpose for it. And so whatever we do, we're not going to decide it now, even if the legislation passes, which again, I think we've been given comfort that it shouldn't be controversial. Whatever deal is ultimately arranged is going to be subject to each of the 4 town votes. So, because they will be obligating the towns to do something. And then we're going to do 2 things, maybe 3. We're gonna spend some time now in Q&A and allow you to ask some questions. We'll try to answer them as best we can. Although again, we've got virtually no information from Bucksport Mill, so there will be some hard stops there. Then we're going to ask you to split up into some groups, and I'm not sure how many there'll be, maybe 4 or 5 groups, to answer kind of these 2 questions, to see if you can come to a consensus on the answers to these 2 questions within the groups. First one is, should the lakes or Toddy Pond be preserved? And the second one is, if so, how do you think the cost of ownership should be allocated between towns and the property owners? Should it be all town, all property owners, or a mix of the 2? And if it's a mix, kind of how do you think about the split? And maybe you'll come up with somebody else to sugar daddy, pay the whole thing. Hold off, yeah. And before I skip over it, this will be my last comment. Will be the question is, the first question seems kind of obvious, maybe to everybody here. Should the lakes be preserved? Most people would say yes, but I guess I just remind you that the reason for the statute, the reason for DEP being, I think, being instructed to release the waters is there is a broad movement to remove dams that are no longer necessary and allow, as I like to say, nature to kind of reassert itself and go back to what it was going to be. It may not be exactly the same as it was before the dams, but it's a possibility. And some people think that's the right thing to do, and I respect and understand that perspective. So I just leave that out there as something that some people will think is the right way to do. So with that, I was going to ask Medea there we go, to give a couple ground rules, and then we'll spend a few minutes taking Q&A and then break into some breakout groups to talk about these two questions.
Just like to share a minute.
Sure.
Talking about donations, and the Toddy Pond Association, a group of our outreach people made this organization that Save Our Ponds, and we started to go, excuse me, a GoFundMe site for people to make donations. On the back of this postcard is a handy dandy little QR code. You can take a picture of it with your phone, and I'm sorry, it will take you to the area that will tell you how to make donations. So you can then make donations to any of the 4 towns that you want to, and any amount that you want to, and we'll go helping support any things that need to be going on. So these cards are at the back of the room if you'd like to print them.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Medea Steinman. Hello.
There you go.
Okay. My name is Medea Steinman, and with the funds mentioned earlier that were acquired through a Maine Community Foundation grant, I have been hired to help with a variety of tasks associated with this community outreach process. So I helped with the survey development, press release, and the postcard mailing that hopefully you all got and read before you threw it in the trash. So now what my job is tonight is, as someone who does not live in any of these communities, I'm here to help facilitate the Q&A process and the conversation that we're going to have tonight. So, what I'd like to do is just sort of some friendly reminders about ground rules and how we'd like this process to go. One person speaks at a time. We all do our best to, if some people talk more than others, if you're one of those folks, maybe, note back your point, hang back, so we can make sure anyone who wants to speak gets a chance to speak. So I might jump in to, intervene and just make sure, everybody's getting a chance. So if I interrupt you, I'm sorry. And also, everybody in the room may not feel the same way, right? So there may be some disagreement, and that's totally fine. The important thing is just to respect each other's views, opinions, preferences, and give people whose views may differ from yours a chance to express their own opinions. So not cutting each other off and that sort of thing. I'm sure it'll all go fine, but just good to remind everybody what we're looking for in this process. So now, I think what we're going to do is open it up for Q&A based on everything you just heard in the PowerPoint presentation and Scott's comments. Let's go ahead and take questions. And am I walking around with the mic? Okay. And remember to practically swallow the mic.
Right. Shall we say our names first or something like that? Is that useful? Barbara Brandel, I live in Hill. I don't have any involved. But I I'm assuming this is the factual question first, but then I have a question. The factual point is we don't have the information about what it costs to maintain and these dams and these conditions. I mean, even orders.
Well, so we don't have specific information about what it's going to cost, nor do we have estimates from them as to what it might cost. What we do know is we've talked to a number of other municipal owners of dams, which are actually simpler than ours. Ours is a high risk dam, so it may cost more, but they have been, I think the two that we talked to, their annual operating costs are about $10,000 a year. But they also have, from time to time, some significant capital expenditures, like I think Sabatis was $1.5 million-ish. Anyway, a lot of which they thought would be funded through grants, but it's sort of, for them, it was kind of $10,000 a year until you had to do a big rebuild.
So would be that whether it's to keep dams, it totally depends on that number. I mean, you could say, sure, of course, we love it, if it's $200 a year, $200,000 a year, no way.
Right.
So I mean, that is so much.
Right.
And then my real second question is, when you talked about the entity, was it for all three dams or together, each one? separately?
We started working, so the 5 towns are working together. But as I said earlier, we sort of thought Silver Lake was enough to have the unique thing that, you know, Bucksport is basically doing their thing with Silver. We still coordinate, but they're doing their thing with Silver Lake. Then the 4 towns said, well, you know, we started dealing with Alamoosic and Toddy similarly, but because Alamoosic is entirely within Orland, it will have it could very well want to have a slightly different structure. It will have a different structure than Toddy.
It just won't have 4 towns, and it'd be the exact same thing, but with
Right.
1 town.
So anyway, so the answer is, we're thinking about each dam being owned by a different entity. The 2, as Gina just said, Alamoosic and Toddy, the entity might look very similar, but they would be different, because otherwise, you know, I mean, from a Blue Hill perspective, I'm not sure if Alamoosic needs a giant rebuild, that we should be paying for that. On the other hand, you know, it could be vice versa, right? Toddy may need a lot of money and Alamoosic maybe, so you get the idea.
Can I add one thing about the cost issue? And yes, we don't know what the costs are. Two real quick things. One, generically, everybody that has been working on this project for quite a while, I think has a pretty significant commitment to improving the quality of fish passage and making them much more environmentally friendly and trying to get grant funds. And Toddy Pond might be a perfect example where the dam could simply be replaced with a natural rock dam. And that would eliminate a lot of maintenance costs that would have to be funded out of grants. But the ongoing repair costs and things, and then what's that gonna amount to? There is a trade-off, because if you do let them get drained, I don't know what you calculated for the town's loss of property taxes per year. You're gonna have to absorb that loss. For Orland, and then granted, we're very different than you, but our taxes would be impacted by over $500,000 a year. So I don't envision us spending $500,000 a year on dam maintenance. Plus, there's businesses, as you see from the business survey, that show some of them would go out of business, jobs would be lost. So you've got an economic impact there that you kind of have to trade off between the costs and on either side of the equation.
And for Blue Hill, we're much smaller, but our corresponding number is about $45,000 of lower property tax receipts if the waters were per year, if the waters were released.
And Surrey, I'm Mary from Surrey, Mary Allen from Surrey, and Surrey's is about 200,000 or possibly 230,000 loss in the tax revenue. So that would be absorbed by the remaining property owners. It would spread around among the property owners in town.
Hello, my name is Rob Howard, fisheries. And that's a subject that's not being addressed there. And could postpone this decision for a long time. You have 2 migratory species that are worth a ton of money in the state of Maine. And probably know then that river produces a ton of money in the spring, and also it's a very important source of the American river herring and shad. I mean, not shad, but alewives. And any change in American river, almost out of time, could have a negative, maybe a positive impact on both of these fisheries. Now, because these are migratory fisheries, these fish are overseen by the United States Fisheries Management Council, which is a quasi-municipal, quasi-state organization that manages migratory fisheries on the East Coast. And as such, they would be, or should, looking at the impact of any change status of the water quality to these two fisheries. And such a study would take some time. And I've been following this. And respond, fortunately, I'm sensitive to the problem of recreational activity, but I'm also very sensitive to problems with commercial fishing. And I have fit many of the needs that I believe that anybody's next. There is strong commercial fisheries take place because of these two bodies of water. And I think it's upon us to go after the Department of Marine Resources, as they're the lead agency when it comes to migratory species, to do a study and find out, okay, what's gonna happen. Keep it in the style of Dan and Warren has a beautiful fishery right now. And the Dan and Warren's fishery is about, I think it's probably less than 30 years old. And that, the dam itself is a great fishery, pretty good. And so I just think that's an issue that it's gotta be put out there. And unless you're gonna have a lot of angry fishermen that'll say, what the heck did you do with the elephant? Well, I'm talking, in a 3-week period, I'm taking $500,000 for the elephants. And something that you see, it's a ton of money.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to throw that out there because that needs to be done before anything else gets done.
Thanks. Yeah, we haven't been totally ignorant. I was gonna say either Mark or maybe, but you wanna kind of speak to it? Because we have actually talked about both alewives and elvers.
I think I can say, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
It should get recorded though. You got the mic?
Oh, okay, so I should use this one.
Yeah.
So I'm Mark Whiting, I'm chair of the board for the Hancock County Saltwater Conservation District. I'm a PhD biologist, I used to work for Maine DEP on salmon restoration work. And I've worked a little bit with the local alewife fishermen. And I think, so we don't know, we don't have all of the answers, but the alewife fishery in the Orland River used to be a whole lot better than it is today. And I think part of the issue is that the condition of the dams right now is such that it's, the fishways in particular, I think are not working well. And if it was our dam, if we owned it, and if we were taking care of it, we could get more fish up and down. And Toddy Pond in particular, because it's so large, would be just a fabulous nursery for these species. So both eels and the alewives would do, in terms of draining the pond or not draining the pond, the more pond you have, the more habitat you have. And both Appaloosa and Toddy Pond have substantial shallows. That would be, that's nursery habitat for alewives. Just in 2009, we were collecting something like 200,000 alewives out of the Orland River. I think today it's some fraction of that, just a few thousand. So things could clearly be much, much better.
I think you'll find that this year, that numbers came up quite a bit as the whole coast of alewife numbers came up quite a bit last year, and that was the result of climate change, the Gulf of Maine, temperature going up. So I think that apples and oranges are going on, but I'm more concerned about the elver situation, because the alewives represent a very small dollar amount. Elvers and the Anguilla rostata that's coming into the lake is a more important species when it comes to the economic benefit than Maine commercial fishermen.
Yes, so I'm from Ellsworth, and that's true with the Union River too. So I think the Union River is number one or number two. River systems in Maine for elvers.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I mean, we should pick it up, but I also want to make sure other people get a chance to ask their questions.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just leave it there.
Questions, comments?
Wow.
You mentioned 3 state agencies that would consider ownership of the dam. How does that fit into the municipalities entering?
It's at the end. So they only, as I understand the statute, they only engage, are statutorily engage, are really engage after the owner certifies the DEP that they couldn't find any alternative owner. So there's a big question. One of the things we've been grappling with is if we don't get to the finish line and it gets to those 3 agency reviews, is there any way to wedge your way back in after the fact? And it's I think the straightforward answer is no, but it's never absolutely no. So it's hard.
I'd like to also add that this statute, I think it was enacted in 1995 or 96. It's never been tested this way. So we are the guinea pig that's
Right.
testing how well the statute is working or not working.
Good evening, my name is Jim Ring, probably on second body, and has been on the body for some years. Anyway, my question has to do with the more about the process, if I understand it, we've got now till the end of October, consultation will occur, required consultation. Consultation implies to me at least 2 parties involved. I've only heard one, so we all know that they're not hearing. My question more specifically is, does anybody, or do we have any idea if we're going to formally approach consultants, shall we say, by AIM about the acquisition? Where does that stand? I'm right now, my expectation is we probably won't get much until like 11.5 hours a day, consultation. That's maybe it's not consultation.
Yeah, look, I mean, by and large, I agree with you. I think I mentioned that 2 weeks ago or so, DEP did send a letter to Bucksport Mill, the owner, saying basically, we understand, we've heard that the information flow has been less than desired, and reminding them that they're supposed to do, kind of a real consultation process and trying and putting some pressure on them to deliver the goods before the 11.5 hour. But it's been 2 weeks and nothing's changed. So again, we don't have any control of the process. DEP's control at the end of the day, I think, basically just to say, was the owner's obligation to consult satisfied or not? And at this point, they won't have to make that decision until the 12th hour, October.
You want to see something about the non-disclosure part of this?
I can do it quickly.
Because-
So I mentioned, I sort of breezed over the idea that Bucksport Mill came back to us and said, we're kind of assembling some information. We got your request. And we're also going to have to talk about confidentiality arrangements. And in the Bucksport Mill answers, they talk about, we'll supply lots of stuff to anybody to qualified buyers who sign an NDA. We as municipalities have a big issue with that because there's a freedom of access law in Maine that says whatever we get is public. So we've already gone back to them and said, and identified that as a problem we have. And said, but we'll be interested to hear how you plan to have some confidentiality, some arrangement that doesn't run afoul of that law. So, I mean, we'll see. Certainly my view is that if we're going to ask Blue Hill voters to vote to own, they keep pounding on me about buying, to own a dam, even if we get it for nothing. If we don't know, if we're not comfortable and we can't explain to you what the costs are going to be and why the costs are what they are, and share the information, basically all the information that they give to us, we can't have a proper vote. We need to tell people what the deal is.
So I got the mic back, but is there anyone else who had a question? And don't want to track one.
Thanks. My name is Soren, Louisville. I just had a question about methodology for determining what the lake level would be minus 8 feet. Is that just like the imagery at 8 feet lower, or is there some kind of more advanced thing going on there?
Bob, you wanna take a crack at that, Mark, or you wanna get a?
So, it was done by a gentleman named Kevin Hancock.
That's my 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
These works are done by a gentleman named Kevin Hancock. He's a Title I resident. He is, got his PhD in geological sciences and was the chairman of the Department of Geology and GIS at Ball State University. So he took a ton of readings, both from GIS stuff and other sources to actually come up with the model that says this is what the lake would look like down 8 feet, which is the best guess we have if they open the gates and let the water out. That sort of answers the question.
Not really, but
Well, it's a combination, I guess what I would say is, my understanding is the methodology, it's kind of LiDAR stuff for the, above the water surface. But it's got a whole bunch, we can provide you with some of the details, there's a whole bunch of bathymetric depths all around Toddy Pond, and he used the model to kind of estimate what the depth contours are.
right,
And
yeah,
If you actually go to the Tiny Pond website, he actually gave us a bunch of his methodology and they are actually posting there, so you actually want to.
I was just curious if, like, between first and second colony and second, third, there's like a natural dam that raised the level into the second parts more than if we just subtracted it.
The question is there another dam between first and second time?
a natural dam.
Our natural.
And just to, let me, it's not about Toddy, but let me kind of respond because that's exactly the situation at Alamoosic. Normally you'd think it would drop way more than 8 feet because you'd think it'd be a 12-foot drop, but there is a natural dam that's right at the narrows part that would hold everything back. So that's why it's projected for only an 8-foot dam. So he was able to look at those things and factor it all in.
Okay, so here's what I suggest, is if you can just hold this. You're gonna have to stay, because my suggestion is we're gonna break up into these little breakout groups now. Answer the 2 questions, should we keep the dam or release the water? And if we're gonna keep the dam, who should bear the costs? And then we'll do that for, I think, a half an hour, and then get back together, hear what the various groups did. And I'm willing to stay as long as you are to do Q&A.